Hey everyone, and yeah, it's been amazing so far, the dialogue. We're going to take a little bit of a kind of key change now because we're going to talk about the day, I guess, is about how do we create schools as a emotionally nurturing, caring, safe environment rather than what we've had forever, really, which is, I guess, places of punishment, discipline, control, teaching kids about hierarchies and authority rather than about um, care, nurturing, and cooperation, all the things that we know make for a good society, and all the evidence shows. And I'm delighted to bring in now Michael Wigglesworth from University of Manchester, who's going to be talking about social and emotional learning and about how we can help young people to develop those skills. So Michael's a professor of educational psychology at the university. I've worked with him around some of social emotional learning and developing plans for that. He's a chartered psychologist and a fellow of the British Psychological Society, and has had a number of different advisory roles. So, Michael, over to you. Looking forward very much to hearing what you'll be telling us about this.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to participate in this conference because for the last 15 years or so, my role as an academic has been examining many of the issues that we have raised this morning in terms of making schools good or making schools well, making schools focus on the development of the individual rather than the production of exams. I want to speak today as an academic, but these things matter to me personally. I'll touch on that a second. In my time in the 50 over the 15 years, I have published a number of academic articles, though I have tried to take a responsibility to work outside of the academy and therefore have worked, as you said, with the Education Endowment Foundation, with the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, and I have some resources to share later because I think it's important that the work is accessible and the work is usable. The University of Manchester has three responsibilities: research, teaching, and social responsibility. And I hope to try and fulfill some of that function. Um, my work is from research. My work is from reading and writing and working with other academics, but it is also based in schools. Um, I try to take pains that when we publish a piece of work or when we do some work, we will take a road trip with that work to visit schools, to host events locally and on other parts of the country to be able to liaise and interact with that work. So you say, look, we think this has happened in social emotional learning. Does that make sense to you? And they go, no, Michael, it doesn't. Okay, cool. Back to the drawing board a bit. I'm also a local governor, well, local to Manchester, and I hope that what I speak to tries to speak to practice because I am not a practitioner. I'm an academic, and I happen to have that interplay really matters. So, what I want to talk about briefly today is to introduce a model, a person-centered model um, that is ubiquitous and influences education systems across the world, including England. So I want to talk about a model of education that we are maybe striving for in England, maybe that we should be striving harder for. I want to talk about why that's relevant for today. And then I want to pose some of the challenges I think that are preventing or stopping sort of further success, and some of the questions and answers we need in order to continue with this model of social emotional learning. Now, at the heart of this model, I'm going to bring some slides up because I love me a PowerPoint, but some at the heart of social emotional learning, and you may know some of this by other names: emotional literacy, resilience building, trauma informed, non cognitive skills, character development, personal soft skills, depending on where you are in your education system, because we have used many names over the last 20 years. But at the heart of it is around emotionality and around speaking to emotions. I'm going to do on the basis of, I wasn't planning to do this, but on the basis of the wealth and power spoken to this morning, I will share two emotional vulnerabilities that I have. One is I'm a little bit intimidated now to do this talk. Following goodness gracious, this morning I am now a little bit worried. So please be kind as I talk through some of these things because I'm a little bit anxious. And second, to speak just briefly as to why I am in this field. School was awful for me. I bloody hated every bloody second of it. I'm not comfortable speaking around experiences of bullying and the hierarchy. That was my experience of the secondary school system, and sort of flippantly, I say that many of my education, but many of my success now is in spite of my education, rather than because of it. I've been fortunate to be where I am. So again, I will speak to this as an academic, but yeah, this matters. It matters to me, and when it matters to me, it occurs to me it matters to all the children we have in school currently. So, on that somber note, let me try and offer maybe some frameworks and some solutions is a strong word, but some opportunities to try and forestall some of the issues we've looked at this morning. So, you may have seen this presented in lots of different words that I've used: non-cognitive, soft skills, social skills. But there is a model of education, an educational philosophy, an educational framework and approach that focuses on children developing personal and interpersonal skills as part of their educational experience. There are different models, but I'm using one that comes from America. It comes from CASEL, which is the Collaboration for the Advancement of Social Emotional Learning, and simply because it gives us a useful model to talk about and a way to break down what these skills might be. So there is an underlying philosophy that says you should focus on the development of children's emotional self-awareness. So this is the ability to recognize when you are angry, when you are happy. What does that look like? That emotional self-awareness. Also, then the self-management. If I am angry, what skills do I have to deploy? If I am anxious about this presentation, I'm aware that I'm amongst friends, I hope. I take a deep breath. I feel my heart rate and I feel my thoughts, so I can recognize anxiety and I can manage it, and I can manage it to deliver the goals of the presentation of this information. And this is not just me. Schools are communities. Schools are social. So we need to be able to recognize emotions in others. I teach a lot, and I'm pretty good at telling when people are bored. So I'm not looking at your cameras just in case, but you know, the droopy eyes and the slow. So social awareness in others is really important as well. And then that facilitates our social skills. So again, schools are a place that we teach, learn, and develop to make friends, to negotiate conflict, to challenge concerns that we have, to negotiate better practices. And if we can do all of these things, we then use responsible decision making, which is, for instance, I've got homework to do. I don't want to do it. I know I feel frustrated by it. So my decision will be maybe to push through or to speak to someone else about it or to make a point to talk to my teacher because I didn't get it done. I've got all of my friends are going to go throw rocks at buses. That's probably got a bad outcome because I have developed empathy and awareness and know that if you throw rocks at buses, someone's going to get upset and I'm going to get into trouble. So again, I use slightly flippant examples, but I'm hoping to enculturate. If you've sat here and gone, right, yes, of course, this is a underpinning philosophy that this is this is what our education should manage. Okay? And you'll notice that in the wider circles, again, when we talk about person centered, this is a psychological model. The individual is in the middle of this. I've talked about it from the individual. But these skills and these frameworks and contexts for the delivery don't happen until there is sustained, explicit, and coordinated teaching and instruction at the classroom level, at the school level, and the philosophy and the ethos that the school takes, but also in the family and the community. And some of the more ambitious work of SEL talks about SEL communities. Some of the materials will talk about everyone has feelings. Your postman has feelings. The policeman has feelings. And so there's this idea that where is education? We've talked about schools and teachers. Well, I'm talking now about schools and teachers and schools and community as well. Okay. I can't see any cameras, so I'm just going to pretend people are nodding and tick on there a little bit. Hooray for Zoom. I can see your camera, Mick, and I can see yours, John. So you're just going to have to carry the crowd for me at this point and go, yes, yes, okay, Michael, carry on. Fine. So hopefully that makes some sense. Well, SEL. I don't need that one. The idea is if one can manage these skills and incorporate these into education, thank you, John, education into these skills, it feeds into the school and it has a positive feedback effect in the school environment. And I know that is ambitious and I know that is ideal, but this is the idea. Thanks, Yvonne. This is the idea about how this is meant to work. So we have taught instruction. We have explicit schooling dedicated not necessarily to academics. It can be incorporated into academics, but there is time and space given to these instructions. Let's work out social scripts for when we want to borrow something or someone has taken something from us. Can we sit down in a circle and talk about a time we felt uncomfortable or afraid and how we managed it? And the idea is if you can do that, that feeds into the school environment because everyone should be modeling that approach. When a teacher can show emotional vulnerability because they need to model the abilities to increase their emotional vocabulary with their children, and that they're able to then have inclusive and open conversations around individual matters. Again, I know it's idealized. That's all right. We're working on the model. We'll look at evidence in a minute. But the idea is then children want to come to schools. Children want to participate in these activities. Children are in a position to learn because they are resilient to the academic struggles and the social struggles that they face. They have frameworks and understanding how to do it. And so the idea is, and I'll come to evidence in a second, then introduction in the early prevention, early intervention ensures that children, for the main part, carry these skills forwards and they are utilized later in the life course. So you might not need to deal with trauma yet. You might not need to deal with loss, with grief, with social challenges, but you are provided the framework and the skills to draw down on those social and emotional assets when you need them. And therefore, we introduce social and emotional learning in school because as an adult, or as a later in the throughout the life course, you need to use them. So it goes. Now, it sounds great. Do we do it? Yeah, we do. I would say in the SEL in our education system, that social emotional learning is probably one of the most dominant orthodoxies that has driven our education system. I will make that argument. It used to be about behavior. It was then about employability. We saw that under Labour about 2007, 2010. You might remember the SEL social emotional learning SEAL aspect being implemented as a national strategy, as a national program. But even now, we've had successive changes of government and we've changed some of the focus that we've had from behavior to attendance to employability and now to mental health. We still refer to, in our latest policy documents over a 20-year period, we refer to social and emotional learning. So it is a framework designed with a focus on the individual and a focus for them for their wellness. And it has been present in our education system, I would argue, for 20 years in one vein or another. And that logic model that I showed you has been consistent. So there is a kind of a question. If we've been doing it for 20 years and we think we like the model, does it work? That was me showing you this morning, and I'd love to speak more time about this. But there is some evidence around the link to teachers and teacher well-being as well. And we could talk about teacher well-being in and of itself, but that is part of the model because I said SEL is embedded in pupils, in classes, in schools. We need to talk about the teachers as well. So SEL is a ubiquitous model. It is in policy documents and educational practices globally. It has been embedded in one way or another for 20 years plus in our education systems, and there is heavy evidence to say it has the potential to work. As anybody eagle-eyed has spotted, where I'm starting to caveat this, it has the potential to work in well-designed and well-implemented contexts. Now we need to talk a little bit about why, Michael, are we not living in the utopia you have just painted? So, when we want to do SEL and SEL is in our system, I have concerns that there is a promise of a panacea. That when some of the policy documents and non-government organizations and charitable organizations that promote SEL, there may be some overselling. I worry around the overemphasis on when we talk about early prevention or promotion of skills or treatment. Who do we talk to? Who do we do? Who is benefiting from SEL? We know because the nature of the evidence is quite summary, is quite aggregative. It overall has an impact, but that I'd argue that the jury is a little bit out about how well, how often, how we target individuals. So if you say, well, SEL can reduce mental health difficulties, that means targeting the individuals or being able to identify individuals that have early mental health difficulties in the first place. And it might be that they don't benefit from the whole class interventions. They might need small group work, or that there might need to be a bit more emphasis. An hour a week is not enough. So there is evidence to support the promotion, the prevention, and treatment of early mental health difficulties, but nuance is required. You can't just say you're doing SEL. We need to look carefully at which programs and which interventions we would use. And not all interventions have the same history of evidence. So there are some SEL programs and some approaches to use for schools that have 20, 30 years of robust evidence, are really high and are able to target those things. And you would feel confident potentially in implementing them. Others have nothing. And so we have a difficulty at the moment about for practitioners and for schools being equipped to be able to tell the difference. I've got some resources to share about that later, but that's a serious problem I think we have in trying to implement SEL is, well, for who? We also have a problem here about its fit and its cultural congruence, and we talked about that this morning. That little brief chart there is really, really quite blunt. But what it was a meta-analysis that we conducted, and it said, let's compare how well all the social emotional learning programs work if they are used in the same country they were written in. So if you wrote one in England and you used one in England, it's a home program. There's lots of work being done in Europe and America. Lots in America. If you buy an American program and try and run it in England, would you get the same results? One bar big, one bar little. But there's pretty strong evidence that we worry strongly about the cultural congruence and fit of an SEL program. It extends beyond going, well, that's okay. Make sure you homegrown, get your homegrown programs. Because the fit for context matters here as well. We were talking about diverse audiences, diverse pupil needs, and teachers and schools who need to understand the need and fit of their pupils. And there you may have one school that says, look, bullying is our concern. Bullying is the problem that we have, and we think SEL will address that. Others may say there may be some local context around trauma-informed schools. There may be other issues that are really complex, and one size does not fit all. But as we look to change or adapt the SEL program and try to fit it for context, we move away from the evidence and the learning that we've got about how to implement it with quality and with rigor. So I have a worry about SEL that yes, it has strong potential, but the jury is a little out about how we make sure we're using the evidence, but also making sure it's fit for context and fit for the needs of the community or the audience that is being looked at. I've got some answers to that in a moment, but these are things I think we treat with caution. Schools ultimately will purchase a package. Schools, especially in this market audience that with this market setting that we mentioned this morning, and the expectation is that a senior leadership team will decide to purchase a series of materials, maybe some technical or professional training, and that they will implement an explicit curriculum, and they do an hour's teaching each week across, making friends, managing emotions. There'll be a series of activities, a series of learning materials. There may be parental sessions, there may be letters going home, and there'll be other recommendations about whole school assemblies, having boards up in the school, and having a wider school approach. But the heart of SEL implementation here is around this explicit introduction of these skills and teaching. And we have some worries about how well that is done. So this is the first one, is the fidelity adaptation. When you have a teacher who says, I believe in this, I want to do this, but I also know my pupils, so I'm going to do it my way. We really are not sure about whether programs should be followed with faith, with fidelity to how the program should be run. Should you read it out word for word? Or the teachers should be enabled in a democratic method to adapt and change the materials. I'm not taking a strong position either way, but I will give an example about why that may be problematic. Being a little bit boastful now, in our world's largest evaluation of an SEL program that was looking at anxiety and depression, the teacher said, right, one of the things was facing uncomfortable feelings. And all the pupils were asked to think about something that worried them. I know my pupils. I think that's too much for them. So I will talk to them about the thing that worries me. It failed to generate that uncomfortable feeling in the children, and therefore they were not able to then recognize the emotions that came with that. So that was a adaptation that was meant to be positive, but then didn't lead to the outcomes that was needed. So I think we have to be cautious here. There's also the quality of the delivery. We've left out teachers. We've left out schools, but they need our support as well. And so giving teachers a box of materials and expecting them to deliver it worries me too. And so we need to think about the training that they will go through and the support and their emotionality and their positioning for their well-being to say whether they have the space and time for it. So as a school, you want to adapt an SEL model, just don't throw it at the teachers. We need to take quite a holistic whole school approach about who's being supported there. And then we also have this program differentiation. I have seen some wonderful practices in SEL. I think there are grassroots movements. I think there are local community matters in schools that showcase fantastic work in their pupils' mental health and well-being, and it's amazing to see. And there are organisations that link that up, like the Anna Freud Centre, which I'll introduce in a moment. But we need to think about, is SEL working? You can't just throw it on top of something else. Program differentiation is, how does it fit into what your school may be doing already? And again, that speaks to the need for training and insight that maybe we are not giving enough time for schools to have the space and time to be able to do. And what I'm speaking here to these programs is the last thing. I just want to give an example here about the wider school context. But this isn't just about teachers delivering materials. This isn't just about pupil outcomes improving their emotional health and emotional regulation. I went to a secondary school to do some consultation. They had a very bad Ofsted rating, and it was to do with the relationship between teachers and pupils. It was a secondary school, so they decided to implement a social and emotional learning program. There were a series of taught lessons, a series of initiatives for the children to think about empathy, for the children to think about the way that they behave with each other. I was like, okay, I could be on this. I'd like to support. Let's talk. I was okay, when you've done this, how will you know this has worked? Pupils will open the doors for teachers. Okay, how else will you know it to work? My spider senses tingle a little bit. They will be quiet and ready to learn. Okay, not disagreeing with you, not a bad outcome, but there's something I can't quite put my finger on. How else will you know it work? Oh, they'll be quiet at lunchtime. Okay. And what it started to be was a list of external compliance. We will know SEL works when they sit down, shut up, and learn. And when, and so it frustrated me, that one, because they were implementing an SEL program, they were doing an evidence-based one, but we didn't get to the heart of the change in the school culture that needed to happen. And that comes from senior leadership. That comes from senior leadership. And so I also worry that people say they're doing SEL, but I think one has to take it to the heart that it has to be really, in many examples, a cultural shift in a school as far as beyond the implementation of materials and saying they're doing it. That one worried me. So there are issues that frustrate us. I wanted to share, though, something a bit positive about how we might start to shift culture and what full embedment of SEL would be. I can't speak lots to this because this is actually a project that's ongoing right now, and I didn't tell our funders I was doing this. So, naming no names, but we are doing this for them, and it does relate to school accountability. And the last week, and this is why I get excited, and thank you for letting me be here and talk for a moment about this, because there are 3 people who have seen this, me and the 2 research assistants, and now you guys. So I'm really excited to share this. We have gone through the literature and said, well, what are the key areas that schools should focus on if they're going to fully embed SEL? Moving beyond the idea of just running a program, we've synthesized all the literature we can find to produce headlines, which we then want to suggest the extent to which schools are doing it. So we're not saying this is a journey, this is a process. We do not say that all schools need to max out each of these areas, but these are the core places that we feel you have to work in and move and put further work in as part of your school development in order to achieve that kind of utopian model I was talking about. Tongue in cheek on utopian, but to move towards a mentally well and emotionally literate school. These shouldn't be surprises either. The idea that you should have student voice, that you should have staff and staff well-being and staff training. But in there, I would like to highlight, for me, coming out of the literature is community. And the idea that the parental involvement, because that's the one I don't see a lot when I go around, is the facilitation of wider community practices. So that would be like when the letters go home, they should be using the same language that you use with the pupils. The teachers should be demonstrating their emotional regulation and modelling with their families as well. So watch this space for more work to come out, but I'm hoping that's a useful guide for people thinking about what should my school look like or where can I advise. I just want to highlight briefly before I move over, and we should have a few moments for questions, that I have some resources that I'll type into the chat where this starts to move towards that. So we did some work with the Education Endowment Foundation along similar lines about how to try and do full SEL. To not treat this as lip service, but to develop truly this emotionally literate and mentally well school. So I want to highlight that one. And then as I finish up, I will post some of these resources in the chat. If this is of interest to you, and you want to hear more about this, these are some amazing resources for building where the evidence base suggests schools should be going. So rush through that as I always do, but there we are. So I think I left us a few minutes for questions. Is that right, John?
Thank you so much, Michael. There's so much interesting stuff there. And thanks for sharing, and really appreciate your openness and talking about it from a personal angle. So we got a little bit of time for questions, if people want to put their hands up. But I've got a couple of immediate ones myself. I mean, one is, I guess, you were talking about the whole school approach and the importance of the whole school approach and the role of the teachers. How do you really get to that kind of deep level social emotional learning program if you've got teachers coming out of teacher training programs where the focus is on, say, discipline, where they maybe haven't done that emotional work themselves? Do you think that there's a need for social and emotional training for the teachers and the staff, particularly, I guess, in secondary schools?
Yeah, yes, I do. And maybe the reason we don't emphasize that or talk about that is where can we intervene at any given stage. So where I agree that continuing professional development, an emphasis on the senior leadership team wanting to change culture in our current schooling system matters. Like this won't happen unless there is a groundswell within that school and senior leading wanting that culture change. But I agree with you. If we want to talk about this very systemically, moving back up into teacher training. Now let's move up back into teacher training and say, why don't we do it? Teacher training is massively full. We overburden our teachers. It's a priority amongst all priorities, and therefore there are no priorities. So then let's move that back up to how we have a national government that has it in our policy document, but a million things beside Mick. So I agree with you, it does belong there. And if we try to trace back and where can we implement and where can we change things now, I think we speak to that. But as a longer term strategy, I agree with you that this speaks to the emphasis in training and the emphasis in the responsibilities of schools. And that seems to be going in a bad direction, not a good direction. So
What do you think we can do, Michael, as members of the community as well as researchers to help it go in a good direction?
I agree with the points earlier around school selection and school choice. For instance, and I do think there's a difficulty there about some of the cultural capital we spoke of. So I get to walk into schools and tell them what I think because I'm awfully privileged in that. But for most part, they don't. I think the sharing of the resources might be a way to go. I think that speaks to evidence. So I'm really pleased that people like the National Institute of Clinical Excellence and the Education Endowment Foundation and National Education Union have materials and resources that can be used as talking points. They have school guides, and if the schools don't read them, and we as parents and we as community members and we as families could bring those to the schools. I would say I've read this really interesting document. Why does your school not look like that? Because it is in national guidance.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point where social and emotional learning is explicitly on the curriculum in the same way that geography and history and English and those kind of skills are a dedicated part of what young people should be expected to learn?
I love that question because I think the answer is yes and no. When we talked about fit for context, a one size fit all model could be concerning. And I've changed my view about it. I might have felt differently 10 years ago. I think that there is space. For instance, we have PSHE, we do have non curricular subjects that potentially allow for that. I think having I don't I, examples of having a national curriculum around social emotional learning did not go well. And we have learnt lessons from that since 2010. I do think giving more time to it matters, but for Mick, I think the answer is actually I would rather see it increasingly embedded in its curricula. So, for instance, one of the learning objectives for a math class might be work through a tricky problem. Yeah. And we've moved from an outcomes based, make sure you can do your 9 times table, to find the thing that challenges you and give it a go. If I was seeing that as a learning objective and that at a parents' evening and that as part of a school assessment, I would like that.
Great, thanks, Mike. We got a couple of hands up, John. So if it's all right, if we go
Let's
to
do that.
El
Yeah.
Gavi, and then we'll go to Laura, and then we will bring this part to an end. I
Yeah,
think.
I think we've got a few minutes for those questions. So El Gavi, I think we should be able to hear you and we can
Hello.
see you. Great to see
Yeah, I
you.
thought it might be better to actually see who you're speaking to. Hi, I'm a assistant head of department. I work in school, and I'm gonna go back before I go forwards. And I have BPD, and in my teacher training, lucky for me, the university were able to understand or see my signs because I was diagnosed after I became a teacher, and I was given a life coach, and that has done amazing wonders for my teaching. And in my teaching practice, I'm noticing a lot of social SEMH issues are being done as behavior issues. So I think if more teachers had DBT training, CBT training, because I have it for myself, I'm able to do it for the pupils. So then it's easier. You can see the relationships are much easier to build. And my actual question was, do you have a what's it called, a case study school? Have you tried to apply this in schools?
Yes. So, okay. So, thank you for your contribution. That's really, I'm privileged to be able to have these insights and help me think about my work. The teacher training one's a really interesting one, just briefly, because I worry about an increasing burden we place on schools, especially with a mental health dialogue. Are we enabling schools in something that we've positioned in our society to be more important, or have we been offloading the reduction in our public sector services into schools? Have we burdened schools with the mental health baton? So when we talk about training teachers, I agree with you, but then I worry that what we need to be very careful that, for instance, we just don't keep burning teachers with more training and expecting them to practice CBT when actually that could be an incredibly skill. So if we can have it, if we have a positive model for that, I like it. I have some worries that we need to do that very carefully. Do we have a case study school? I would direct you to the Anna Freud Center, has a series of case studies for work that they do. And what I really like about those examples, oh, and there is a couple of case studies in the Education Endowment Foundation materials as well. And what I like about them is each one does have a different path. So that was my comment to Mick, which was I think we can have these different models, but one school, for instance, where there's a lot around working families, that they don't have access to pastoral support is different for a different school that might have issues around violence, for instance. So there's a series of case studies, and I think each school does have a different path to take potentially.
Thanks, Michael. Did you want to respond at all, or you're just on mute?
I just wanted to say thank you, and that was it. And I'm going to look more into it because I'm actually doing my senior leadership MPQ, and my chosen pathway is to improve SEMH embedding into maybe like form time or PSHE or citizenship, because at the moment it's not something that is explicitly taught in schools. So I'm really happy that there's more like-minded people that are thinking the same along the same lines. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Laura, let's go to you. If we can take Laura off mute.
Thank you. I will try and be succinct because I have so much that I feel I need to speak to. But I think one of the things that's really important is that there is scientific research out there around the way children's brain develops and learning that actually needs to be heard at the highest levels to know this isn't in opposition. This isn't instead of the other pressures of teaching and learning. This is, if we get this right, all the rest will be easier. And I think I just wanted to say thank you for saying about the embeddedness of this, because there are lots and lots of examples of schools who have social emotional learning curriculums, but unless it's understood and embodied by every single person in that school community, it's just tokenistic. This has to be something that we live and breathe. And I agree with you about the additional pressures of within schools, having started as a teacher and now working as a therapist. I agree, but what we need to do is stop splitting these things. The issues of social care and social justice and mental health and education are not separate issues. They're interlinked, and we need to have professionals that are willing to see this and work together to hold the burden instead of passing it between each other and wanting someone else to blame.
I'd recently done, they have post-note briefings for government, so they go around and ask individuals who are leading in that. So I feel that just moving forwards, I don't know, there's always an issue about evidence getting out there, and I think there is always part of that, but I suspect there is issues around funding and political will beyond the ability to access the information and current knowledge that is there. That's my cynicism. Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. Georgia, and then we'll bring this.
Georgia, hello, Georgia.
Hello, Michael. So good to see you again. Great talk. I'll never forget how supportive you've been to me in my first academic appointment at the University of Manchester. So it's so great to see you. Excellent talk. Social emotional learning is something that sounds really great in theory, but every person who tries to implement it might perceive it in a completely different way. There is that balance we have to strike between this diverse needs and a program that's targeted to a particular group, so who is benefiting from it. That's one thing. And the second is I would love to hear your thoughts about how you think we can achieve that cultural shift in schools with emphasis on the community. I found that a really exciting element in your talk, and I really look forward to your work on this in the future. Thank you.
I think that's a really interesting. I think the narrative has shifted towards community and culture and away from just explicit programming. From the schools I speak to, I feel there's a lot of difficulty engaging with parents, and I agree with that culture. So again, there's a wider cultural shift here about schooling. And this morning we heard about, schools do to the pupils and parents turn up. And I have felt a fish out of water when I've been at a parents' evening and asked them questions, and all the parents are like, who does this person think he is challenging the school? He's like, he's a professor of educational psychology, fight me. But, I agree with you. I don't have an answer to that wider culture other than there are noises around initiatives in some of the guidance. Have a pupil and parent day, have a school open day, not a pupil open day. I think that is probably one of the challenges we're moving into. I don't have great answers for that.
It's an area for further work, isn't it? And I guess these are the kind of questions that we need to work on together. Michael, we need to move on. Thank you so much. Thank you for your question, Georgia. And thank you so much, Michael, for joining us and bringing in all your knowledge and understanding. We hope to be in touch with you about as we move forward on this. So I am going to hand back now to Claudia.